Right, so the fallout of the £5 billion worth of cuts dressed up as reforms to social security, but which in reality are targeting disabled people disproportionately, continues. And it could yet land Keir Starmer in court potentially a lot sooner than we all thought. As would you believe it, but these proposals might have just fallen afoul of the Equality Act. Well, indeed, and so they ought to have done. There is falling afoul of the law, though, and there is being held to account for it when you're in the government. The two don't always go hand in hand, and yet in this instance, we might actually see that happen. You see, as a result of these proposals not at all looking like they are fair, and the DWP not at all looking like it is adhering to the legally binding public sector equality duty that all government departments must adhere to, i.e. producing an impact assessment for their proposals which still have not been published, if they even exist, Starmer Co have attracted the attention of the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, the EHRC, over these proposals. And isn't it a delicious irony that the former human rights barrister might now be taken to court by the EHRC? He really has fallen a very long way, hasn't he? Right, so the Labour Party of Keir Starmer, no longer a Labour Party whatsoever, except in name as that is, well, they're in an absolute boatload of bother over their obscene proposed attacks on disability benefits, which are still dominating people's thoughts, and even the mainstream news agenda at that. Especially the right-wing press, though, who, let's be honest, couldn't care less, actually, and would be cheering all of this if it was coming from the Tories or Reform. But it's Labour, and it doesn't matter how right-wing Labour now is, they will keep on printing stuff against them. Shows these rags really can hold power to account when they want to, but only when it suits their own biases. The proposed cuts to disability benefits, though, spearheaded by Chancellor of a Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, and Work and Pension Secretary Liz Kendall, have sparked outrage amongst the public and now raised serious legal and ethical questions that are now being confronted by the Equality and Human Rights Commission, the EHRC. These cuts are blatantly seen to be disproportionately targeting disabled people and young disabled people particularly, and all appears to be in violation of the Equality Act of 2010 and is ignoring the public sector equality duty that all government departments must adhere to alongside that. The EHRC is now launching an investigation into these proposed cuts, citing concerns over their compliance with the Equality Act. This development is particularly ironic given Starmer's background as a human rights barrister, as aforementioned, is it not? But given all of his support for Israel, despite their actions in Gaza, let's face it, it isn't really any kind of a surprise to see human rights not factoring very highly in political decisions that he has sign-off on. The Equality Act of 2010 is a cornerstone of anti-discrimination law in the UK. It protects individuals from discrimination based on several characteristics, including disability. Section 15 of the Act is all about disability. It explicitly prohibits discrimination arising from disability, stating that a person must not be treated unfavourably because of something arising in consequence of their disability, unless such treatment can be justified as a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim. Additionally, the Act imposes a public sector equality duty on all government departments, requiring them to have due regard to the need to eliminate discrimination, advance equality of opportunity, and foster good relations between different groups. The proposed cuts to disability benefits, therefore, are contravening these provisions. By reducing financial support for disabled people, the government is effectively treating them unfavourably because of their disability. The cuts will disproportionately affect young disabled people who are already amongst the most vulnerable in society by raising the health and disability component of universal credit from 18 to 22, because apparently disability doesn't exist if you're under 22. The Resolution Foundation has warned that these cuts will push many disabled people further into poverty, exacerbating existing inequalities inflicted upon them by the Tories before. The public sector equality duty requires the government to consider the impact of its policies with regards to equality. It's an impact assessment, basically. Yes, that word again. And this is being violated with Liz Kendall's refusal to publish such an assessment, claiming one has been done. We've only got her word for that, haven't we? We assume one has been done. But she won't release it before Rachel Reeves gives her spring statement. And there's a crooked reason for that, too, which I'll come on to in a second. Now, the EHRC's decision to investigate the proposed cuts is a damning indictment of the Labour government's approach. We're all appalled, we're all disgusted, little surprise, they are as well. Responsible for overseeing the enforcement of the Equality Act, the EHRC has expressed serious concerns about the potential discriminatory impact of these cuts, the lack of transparency surrounding the cuts, justifying their concerns no end at that, further compounding the issue. Labour's failure to publish those impact assessments, therefore, before Rachel Reeves gives her spring statement, underlines the crookedness going on here, though. Because, you see, the Office for Budget Responsibility, the OBR, as anyone who watches the budget or the spring statement knows, they give a forecast for how the government is doing, don't they? And usually the Chancellor of the day makes much of this as a sign that they are doing things right, pointing out the OBR is agreeing with them, that their plans are working. That's generally how they spin it, isn't it? The problem is, by delaying the impact assessments until after the spring statement, it means the OBR forecast has to factor in the full impact of the cuts. Even if the government are forced later by the courts or by Parliament refusing to pass these measures, or so that they later have to be watered down, the forecast shall be artificially optimistic, therefore, shall we say, when the time of the spring statement comes. Labour might only be 8 months into government, but this intentional lack of transparency is not new for Starmer's lot. Reeves herself previously refused to publish impact assessments for those cuts to the winter fuel allowance, which later revealed that 7 in 10 disabled pensioners lost their entitlement. Why does she hate the disabled so much? It's a pattern of behaviour that suggests a deliberate attempt to avoid scrutiny and push through harmful policies under the radar or under the guise of being economically responsible, even when they are as depraved and mendacious as this is. One of the most alarming aspects of these reforms isn't even the cuts, but the so-called reforms as well. The changes to PIP eligibility criteria will make it harder for people to access the support they need, pushing many more into financial hardship, especially those who use this additional money to cover the additional costs that having a disability brings with it. Not helping more people into work, but driving them out of it and into further poverty due to the cuts coming alongside. And this is particularly concerning given the already high levels of poverty and unemployment amongst disabled people. The cuts will exacerbate these inequalities, leaving many without the means to live independently or participate fully in society. The Labour government and the Department for Work and Pensions have also attempted to mislead the media and the public into supporting the cuts too. The DWP has issued press releases that downplay the impact of the cuts and present them as necessary reforms. A bit of a hard sell when Starmer has increased defence spending and sent billions to Ukraine at the same point, and whilst Rachel Reeves has watered down tax impacts on non-doms and refuses point blank to consider a wealth tax on the super rich. Well, Disability News Service has exposed the DWP's misleading press releases, highlighting the government's attempts to manipulate public opinion. Here's an excerpt exposing all. The press release was published 5 days before Kendall launched her reforms of the disability benefits system. DWP stated that the number of disabled people on universal credit who were too sick to look for work had risen by 383% since the start of the pandemic, from 363,000 to 1.8 million. But it only managed to reach that striking calculation by ignoring those who had been found not fit for work and were still receiving employment and support allowance, ESA, in 2019 to 2020, of which there were nearly 2 million. The only reference to ESA was in a further information note at the bottom of the press release, which admitted that an increase was anticipated for reasons including people moving from legacy benefits, which includes ESA, onto universal credit. A huge misleading stat peddled as Labour continued to mete out Tory benefit reforms at that point. These cuts, without any impact assessment yet seen, scaring the hell out of thousands of people, as we know, will push many disabled people into poverty or further into poverty, leaving them without the means to meet their basic needs. The changes to PIP eligibility criteria will make it harder for disabled people to access the support they need, forcing many more to rely on food banks and other forms of charitable assistance. The Labour government's proposed cuts to disability benefits are, to my mind, a clear violation of the Equality Act and a betrayal of their supposed commitment to social justice. The cuts will disproportionately affect disabled people and young disabled people especially, pushing many into poverty and undermining their prospects for the future. The EHRC's investigation into the cuts, or the announcement that one is coming, is a damning indictment in and of itself, never mind what they end up actually finding. The government's approach to ignoring inequality and human rights for what they think is the ever popular move of bashing people on benefits, ignoring the whys and the wherefores in that. It's time those vicious narratives were challenged more widely in public, and governments were told in no uncertain terms that this behaviour is no longer going to be a vote winner for them, demanding that the government upholds its legal and moral obligations to disabled people instead of inflicting more misery on those with enough to deal with already. The Equality Act is a vital tool for protecting the rights of disabled people, and it must be defended against any attempts to undermine it. The Labour government's proposed cuts to disability benefits are not only morally repugnant and indefensible, but legally precarious along with it, and so they damn well should be. It's no wonder Labour is seeing a mass exodus of members across the country, but in the lead up to local elections a little over a month away now, they're losing elected officials in their droves, and on one council have lost 6 in almost the same number of weeks. Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as supporting the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. And I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.